Before we dive into this chilling tale, hit that subscribe button on Mr. Shadow for more spine-tingling stories. The sun was just starting to rise as I packed the last of our bags into the trunk of our old station wagon. The smell of coffee filled the air, and Lisa, my partner, was already in the driver's seat, her face lit up with excitement. "Ready to go?" Lisa asked, looking at me with a big smile. "Definitely," I said, closing the trunk. "I'm so ready for this trip." We had been planning this road trip for months. It was our first big adventure together, and we couldn't wait to hit the road. Our destination was a cabin in the mountains, but we wanted to enjoy the journey, not just the end. We planned to drive south on Highway 59, then join Route 66. We were excited to explore small towns and see interesting places along the way. The idea of discovering quirky spots and hidden gems was thrilling. "This trip is going to be amazing," Lisa said, as we drove past fields and the morning sun warmed the car. "I can't wait to see what we find." We had packed the car with snacks, drinks, and our favorite music. Our plan was to drive for a few hours each day, stopping wherever we wanted. The open road was full of possibilities, and we were eager to make the most of it. As we drove, the scenery changed from flat fields to rolling hills. We laughed, sang along to our playlist, and talked about the places we wanted to visit. Every mile brought us closer to new adventures. After a few hours on the road, we saw a sign for a rest area up ahead. "There's a rest area coming up," Lisa said. "Let's stop and take a break." I agreed. It was time to stretch our legs and grab a snack. The journey had just begun, and we were excited to see what was next. The drive had been long, and the sun was now high in the sky. Lisa and I had been on the road for hours, with the scenery changing from rolling hills to flat, open spaces. We were both tired and ready for a break. "I think we've driven far enough for now," Lisa said, glancing at the clock on the dashboard. "Let's stop at that rest area up ahead." "Sounds good to me," I replied. "I could use a stretch." We drove on, following the signs for the rest area. The highway was quiet, with only a few cars passing by. As we turned off the main road and onto a smaller path, the landscape changed. Trees grew thicker, and the open fields turned into a dense forest. The rest area came into view, and it was unlike any we had seen before. It was isolated, sitting alone in the middle of the forest. The rest area had a single small building, an old picnic table, and a few worn-out benches. The parking lot was empty, and the whole place had a rundown feel. "It's a bit creepy here," Lisa said, pulling the car into a parking spot. "I didn't expect it to be so deserted." "I agree," I said, looking around. "It feels like it's been abandoned for a while." The building looked old and weathered. Its paint was peeling, and the roof had patches of missing shingles. The picnic table was covered in dirt, and the benches were worn and splintered. Even though it was bright outside, the area had a strange, shadowy feel. We got out of the car and stretched our legs. The silence was unusual. There were no birds chirping or rustling leaves, just an eerie quiet. "I'm going to use the restroom," Lisa said, heading towards the small building. "Want anything?" "No, I'm good," I replied. "I'll just wait here." Lisa walked slowly towards the building, and I stood by the car, looking around. The forest seemed to press in on the rest area, as if it was trying to reclaim the space. The trees were tall and thick, their branches creating a dense canopy overhead. I noticed that there were no other vehicles or signs of people. The rest area felt like it was stuck in time, forgotten by everyone. Even the small trash can by the building was overflowing with old papers and wrappers, as if no one had bothered to empty it in years. Lisa came back from the building and looked just as unsettled as I felt. The restroom was weird, she said. It smelled musty, and the lights flickered. I wouldn't want to use it for anything serious. I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. Well, at least it's not like we're staying here overnight. Just a quick break and then back on the road. Lisa nodded and we decided to sit at the picnic table for a moment. We pulled out some snacks from the cooler and tried to enjoy our break. But the eerie atmosphere was hard to ignore. As Lisa and I sat at the picnic table, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling from the rest area, we started to notice some strange things. The quiet of the place seemed to be growing thicker, almost like it was pressing in on us. I was nibbling on a granola bar when I heard a faint noise coming from the woods. It sounded like footsteps, but they were too soft and irregular to be anyone walking. I glanced at Lisa, who was busy unpacking the cooler. "Do you hear that?" I asked quietly. Lisa looked up and listened. "What?" "I don't hear anything." I strained my ears, trying to catch the sound again. It was gone now, but the silence felt heavy and thick. "Never mind," I said, not wanting to worry her. It was probably just the wind. We continued eating our snacks, but the odd feeling wouldn't go away. I noticed that the air felt cooler here, even though the sun was shining. It was as if the rest area had its own climate, different from the rest of the road. Lisa finished her sandwich and picked up a piece of paper from the table. "Look at this," she said. "There's a strange symbol on the bench." I looked at the bench and saw what she was talking about. There was a small, crude drawing scratched into the wood. It looked like a triangle with a line through it, surrounded by squiggly lines. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. "Do you think it means something?" Lisa asked. "I don't know," I replied. "Maybe it's just some kids messing around. Let's not worry about it." Lisa nodded, but I could tell she was still uneasy. We decided to take a walk around the rest area to stretch our legs. As we walked, I noticed more strange details. The trash can was overflowing with old, rotting food. It seemed out of place, as if no one had emptied it for a long time. The building's windows were grimy, and one of the window panes was cracked. "It's weird how nobody seems to take care of this place," Lisa commented. "It's like it's been forgotten." "Yeah," I agreed. "But it's not like we're here for long. Just a quick break and then we'll be back on the road." As we continued walking, I heard that odd noise again, the soft, irregular footsteps. It seemed closer this time. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. The woods were dense, and the shadows made it hard to see clearly. "Lisa," I said, lowering my voice. "Do you hear that?" Lisa stopped and listened. "I don't hear anything now. Maybe it's just an animal." "Maybe," I said, though I wasn't so sure. The sound was unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We reached the edge of the rest area, where a small path led deeper into the woods. The path was overgrown, and the trees were thick. I noticed some strange markings on the trees, scratches and symbols that looked similar to the one on the bench. They were faint but visible, like someone had used a knife or some tool to make them. "What do you think those are?" Lisa asked, pointing to the markings. "I'm not sure," I said, feeling uneasy. "They don't look like anything I've seen before." We walked back to the picnic table, and the odd feeling continued to grow. The air seemed colder, and the silence was almost deafening. I could feel a pressure building in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I glanced at my watch. "We've been here for a while. Maybe it's time to go." Lisa looked relieved. "Yes, let's get out of here." We packed up our things quickly and headed back to the car. As we were leaving, I couldn't help but glance back at the rest area. The building looked even darker now, and the shadows in the forest seemed to be closing in. "Something about this place just doesn't feel right," Lisa said, echoing my thoughts. "I know," I said, starting the car. "Let's just get back on the road and put this place behind us." As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror at the rest area. It was now a distant, shadowy spot, disappearing into the trees. The strange symbols and noises stayed with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. We drove on in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. The open road ahead felt comforting, but the eerie feeling from the rest area lingered. It was a sense of unease that we couldn't quite explain, and we were both relieved to leave it behind. As we continued driving down the highway, the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the road. The peaceful drive we had been enjoying was suddenly interrupted by an uneasy feeling that I couldn't shake off. The strange markings and sounds from the rest area kept replaying in my mind. Lisa was quiet too, her usual chatter replaced by a nervous silence. I could tell she was still thinking about the rest area. I glanced over at her. "You okay?" I asked. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little on edge. I keep thinking about that place." "Me too," I admitted. "Let's just focus on getting to the next town. We'll find a nice place to stay and forget about this." As we drove, the road became less traveled. There were fewer cars, and the landscape grew more desolate. The trees on either side of the highway were dense, casting eerie shadows in the dim light. "I think I see a sign up ahead," Lisa said, pointing. "Looks like there's a small town coming up." "Great," I said, feeling a bit of relief. "We can find somewhere to eat and get some rest." As we approached the sign, I noticed a small, dilapidated building off to the side of the road. It was an old, abandoned gas station with a flickering neon sign that read "Open." The building looked like it hadn't been used in years, and the sign seemed almost out of place in the dim light. "That place looks creepy," Lisa said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know," I said. "But we're almost at the town. Let's keep going." Just then, a figure appeared on the side of the road. It was a man, standing next to a rusty old pickup truck. He was wearing dirty clothes and a hat pulled low over his face. As we approached, he raised a hand and waved, but his movements were slow and deliberate, almost mechanical. I slowed the car down, unsure of what to do. "Should we stop?" I asked. Lisa looked uneasy. "I don't know. He looks a little strange." Before I could decide, the man started walking toward us. He had an odd, shuffling gait, and his face was still hidden in the shadow of his hat. I could feel my heart start to race. Something about his presence felt wrong, like we were being watched. I rolled down the window just a crack and called out, "Hey, can we help you?" The man stopped a few feet from the car and looked at us. His eyes were hard to see, hidden beneath the brim of his hat. "Evening," he said, his voice gruff and low. "Got any trouble?" "No, we're just driving through," I said. "We're heading to the next town." The man nodded slowly, still staring at us. "Road's been quiet tonight. Might be best to keep moving." "Okay, thanks," I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. "We'll be on our way." I started to roll up the window, but the man suddenly leaned closer. "You folks seen anything strange tonight?" Lisa and I exchanged a worried glance. "No," I said quickly. "We haven't seen anything unusual." The man seemed to study us for a moment before backing away. "Well, be careful out there. Some folks don't leave these parts." With that, he turned and shuffled back to his truck. I watched him closely as he climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and he drove off, the headlights cutting through the darkness. I let out a sigh of relief as the truck disappeared down the road. "That was weird," Lisa said. "I didn't like the way he looked at us." "Yeah, I didn't either," I agreed. "Let's just get to the town and forget about it." We continued down the road, but the encounter with the man had left us both on edge. The silence in the car was heavy, and every little noise seemed amplified. The shadows on the road grew longer as the sun set completely, and the headlights of our car barely cut through the darkness. Suddenly, Lisa gasped. "Look!" I turned my head and saw something moving in the trees by the roadside. It was hard to make out, but it looked like someone, or something, was watching us from the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest. "What is that?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "But let's not stop." I pressed the gas pedal and we drove faster, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and the eerie figure. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and the darkness felt like it was closing in around us. After what felt like an eternity, the lights of the town finally appeared in the distance. We both breathed a sigh of relief as we entered the town limits. The familiar glow of streetlights and the signs of businesses made us feel safer, even if just for a moment. As we found a place to eat and check into a hotel, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread from the day. The encounter with the strange man and the figure in the woods had left us both unsettled. We tried to focus on relaxing and enjoying our meal, but the eerie memories of the road and the unsettling encounter continued to linger in our minds. The next morning, we all agreed to leave as soon as possible. Our night in the small town had not been restful. The strange encounter from the previous evening kept us awake, and the unsettling feeling from the rest area still lingered. We packed up and got back into the car, hoping that driving away from the rest area would ease our nerves. But as we started our journey, Lisa brought up something that had been bothering her all night. "Remember how the man said the road had been quiet?" she asked. "And then there was that thing in the trees? I keep thinking about it." "Yeah, I can't get it out of my head either," I admitted. "But we need to keep moving. We'll be fine once we're back on the main highway." We drove for a while, but the feeling of unease didn't go away. The landscape outside our window seemed to shift, with the trees growing thicker and the sky darkening more quickly than usual. It was like the road was never ending, and the quiet around us was more oppressive than ever. After several hours, we came across a sign indicating another rest area ahead. We were in need of a break, so we decided to stop. The rest area was located just off the highway, and it seemed even more isolated than the last one. The trees surrounding it were dense, and the whole place looked abandoned. The picnic tables were covered in dirt, and the building was old and run down. As soon as we parked, the uneasy feeling returned. I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. We got out of the car and stretched our legs, but none of us were comfortable. "This place gives me the creeps," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "Yeah, it's not as inviting as I thought," I agreed. "But we need to stretch and use the restroom." We walked toward the rest area building, and I noticed more strange markings on the walls. They were just scribbles, but they looked like they had been there for a long time. Some were faded, while others were fresh and bright red. It was unsettling. Inside, the rest area was even worse. The floors were dirty, and the smell of mildew was strong. The lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls. We could hear faint noises, like whispers or distant thumps, but whenever we tried to pinpoint the source, it was gone. "I don't like this," said Mark, one of our friends. "Let's just use the bathroom and get out of here." We quickly used the restrooms and headed back to the car. As we walked, I noticed more strange things. There were old, broken-down vending machines that hadn't been used in years. A faded map on the wall showed a different layout than the one we had seen on our drive. "There's something off about this place," Lisa said, her eyes wide. "I feel like we're being watched." I tried to reassure her. "It's probably just our nerves from last night. Let's get back on the road." As we loaded back into the car, I noticed a figure standing in the distance, near the edge of the trees. It was a man, dressed in similar clothes to the one we had seen before. His face was hidden in the shadows, and he didn't move. Not again, I muttered, trying to ignore the figure. The feeling of dread grew stronger as we started the car and began to drive away. The rest area was now behind us, but the sense of unease stayed with us. The road seemed longer, the shadows darker. Every turn we took felt like it was leading us further into some kind of trap. "I can't wait to be out of here," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "This place is making me really nervous." "Me too," I said. "Let's just keep driving. We should be back on the main highway soon." We drove for a while, but the landscape didn't change. The same dense trees and darkening sky seemed to follow us. The quiet was deafening, broken only by the sound of the tires on the road and the occasional creak of the car. "Do you hear that?" Mark asked suddenly. I listened closely and heard a faint sound, like someone tapping on the car's windows. I glanced around but saw nothing. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it had started. "Probably just the branches," I said, trying to sound calm. "We're almost out of here." But the feeling of dread wouldn't go away. The rest area had left a mark on us, and no matter how fast we drove, we couldn't escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The sense of unease grew stronger with each mile, making the drive feel endless. We finally reached a more populated area, and the familiar sights of the city were a welcome relief. The feeling of being watched slowly faded, but the memory of the rest area and the strange figure remained with us. We were relieved to be back among people and away from the isolation of the rest area. Even as we settled into a hotel for the night, we couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something terrible. The rest area had left us all on edge, and the sense of dread from that place lingered in our minds, reminding us of the unsettling encounter and the eerie atmosphere we had left behind. We were glad to finally leave the rest area behind. It was supposed to be a simple stop, a chance to stretch our legs and get back on the road. But as we drove away, something felt off. We were heading to our next destination, but the road seemed different from what we remembered. The sun was setting, and the sky was a deep orange. We had been on the road for hours, and the familiar sights of the highway were nowhere to be seen. Instead, the road ahead looked unfamiliar. It felt like we were driving through a never-ending forest, and the landmarks we had passed earlier were gone. "This doesn't look right," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "I thought we were supposed to be on the main highway by now." "I know," I replied, glancing at the map. "But according to this, we should be on the right track. Maybe the map is outdated." Mark, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. "What if we took a wrong turn? Maybe we missed an exit." "Impossible," I said, trying to stay calm. "We've been following the signs." But my words felt hollow. The road seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't match the map. The trees were closer than before, their branches reaching out as if trying to block our way. As we drove, the feeling of being trapped grew stronger. The road was eerily quiet, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves. It felt like we were in a place that was closing in on us, making it harder to escape. "Let's pull over and check the map again," I suggested, trying to find some clarity. We pulled off the road and stopped the car. The headlights cut through the darkness, and we could see the outline of trees around us. We got out and looked at the map, but it didn't make any sense. The roads on the map didn't match the ones we were driving on. "This is not right," Lisa said, her voice rising with panic. "We're lost." Mark looked around, his face pale. "This place is changing. It feels like we're going in circles." We tried to retrace our steps, but every turn seemed to lead us back to where we started. The road looked the same no matter which way we went. The trees seemed to be growing thicker, and the darkness was closing in. "Maybe we should just keep driving," I suggested. "We might find something eventually." We got back in the car and continued driving, but the road only got worse. The trees were now so close that they brushed against the sides of the car. The road was narrow and twisted, and it felt like we were driving through a maze. "I can't take this anymore," Lisa said, tears in her eyes. "We need to find a way out." "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we have to stay calm. Panicking won't help." We drove on, but the feeling of dread grew stronger. The road seemed to loop back on itself, and no matter how far we drove, we couldn't escape the forest. The familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by trees and shadows. "Look!" Mark suddenly shouted. "There's a sign." We pulled over again, and Mark pointed to a sign partially hidden by vines. It was old and faded, but we could make out a few words: "Rest area, this way." "That's impossible," I said, staring at the sign. "We already passed the rest area. How could it be back here?" "It's like we're stuck in a nightmare," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "We're trapped." The road ahead seemed to narrow even more. The trees were now so dense that we couldn't see beyond them. It felt like we were in a tunnel of darkness, and the car headlights barely made a difference. "We need to go back," I said. "Maybe there's another way out." We turned the car around and drove back the way we came, but it was no use. The road seemed to shift and change, leading us back to the same place over and over. The feeling of being trapped was overwhelming. The car's headlights suddenly flickered, and the engine sputtered. "What now?" Lisa cried out. "I don't know," I said, trying to start the car again. "It's not working." We were stuck. The car refused to start, and the road around us seemed to close in even more. The darkness was almost suffocating, and the trees felt like they were pressing in on us. "We have to get out," Mark said. "Maybe we can find help." We reluctantly left the car and stepped into the dark forest. The trees seemed even more imposing up close, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of wind. As we walked, the forest seemed to shift and change around us. The trees appeared to move, and the ground felt uneven. We tried to stay together, but the darkness made it hard to see. "This can't be happening," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "We're lost." "We have to keep moving," I said, trying to stay hopeful. "We'll find a way out." But with every step we took, the forest seemed to grow darker and more oppressive. The feeling of being trapped was overwhelming, and the fear of never escaping was all-consuming. The night was closing in, and the sense of dread was growing stronger. We were lost in a place that seemed to change and shift around us, with no clear way out. The rest area had somehow ensnared us, and we were left to face the terrifying reality of our situation. We were now deep in the forest, our car abandoned behind us. Panic set in as we realized just how lost we were. We had hoped the forest would lead us to safety, but it felt like it was closing in around us. "Let's split up," I suggested. "Maybe we can find a way out faster if we cover more ground." "No!" Lisa shouted. "We shouldn't split up. It's too dangerous." Mark, looking just as frightened, agreed. "We should stay together. We don't know what's out here." With no better plan, we decided to stick together. We started walking, the forest seeming to grow darker and more tangled with each step. The trees were so dense that we could barely see ahead. The ground was uneven, and we stumbled over roots and rocks. We tried calling for help, but our voices were swallowed by the thick forest. The only sound was the crunching of leaves under our feet and the occasional rustle of branches. The silence was unnerving. "We need to find a landmark or something," I said, trying to stay calm. "Anything that can help us." Lisa and Mark nodded, but it was clear that fear was creeping into their voices. We came across an old, broken-down sign. It was too faded to read, but it felt like another sign of how hopeless our situation was. Suddenly, Lisa spotted something strange. "Look at that," she said, pointing to the side of the path. There, partially hidden by vines, was an old metal gate. It looked rusty and abandoned, and it was covered in strange symbols and markings. "That gate wasn't here before," Mark said. "Where does it lead?" We approached the gate cautiously. It was locked, and the rust made it hard to see if there was a way to open it. The symbols on the gate were odd and unsettling, and they seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. "We need to get past this gate," I said. "Maybe it leads to a way out." We tried pushing and pulling on the gate, but it wouldn't budge. The rust had locked it tight. Desperation set in as we tried to force it open with sticks and rocks, but it was useless. "This is hopeless," Lisa said, tears in her eyes. "We're never getting out of here." "We can't give up," I said, trying to be encouraging. "Let's keep looking." We left the gate behind and continued walking. The forest seemed to shift and change as we moved, and every turn led us deeper into confusion. We found ourselves back at the same spot over and over, as if the forest was trapping us. At one point, we came across a small, abandoned cabin. It was falling apart, with broken windows and a roof that looked like it might collapse at any moment. "This place is creepy," Mark said, eyeing the cabin warily. "Should we check it out?" "Maybe," I said. "It could have supplies or clues." We entered the cabin cautiously. Inside, it was dark and musty. There were old, rotting furniture and a broken fireplace. On the wall, we saw more of those strange symbols, painted in a way that looked almost like a warning. "Let's search the cabin," I said. "Maybe we'll find something useful." We split up inside the cabin, looking through drawers and cabinets. Lisa found an old, dusty journal. She opened it, but the pages were mostly blank, with only a few scribbled notes that didn't make sense. "This doesn't help us," Lisa said, frustration in her voice. "We need to get out of here." We gathered back outside and continued our search. The forest seemed to grow darker, and our exhaustion was making it harder to think clearly. We came across a stream, hoping it would lead to a road or a way out. But the stream was narrow and choked with weeds, making it difficult to follow. "Let's try following the stream," I suggested. "Maybe it will lead somewhere." We followed the stream for what felt like hours, but it only led us deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to close in even more, and the sense of being trapped was overwhelming. At one point, Lisa screamed. We rushed over to her, and she was staring at something in the bushes. It was a small, wooden box, half buried in the dirt. "What is that?" Mark asked, eyeing the box with suspicion. "I don't know," I said. "But let's see." We opened the box carefully. Inside were old, rusted tools and a faded map. The map was old and torn, and it was hard to make out any details. But it seemed to show a different path out of the forest. "This might help us," I said, studying the map. "Let's follow this path." We tried to follow the map, but the forest seemed to shift around us. Every time we thought we were making progress, we found ourselves back where we started. The sense of dread was growing stronger, and our hope was fading. The forest seemed to mock us, with the same dark trees and tangled underbrush appearing over and over. We were exhausted and scared, and our attempts to escape only seemed to lead us further into despair. The night was closing in, and the fear of never escaping was taking over. The forest was like a maze with no exit, and every attempt to find a way out only seemed to make things worse. Our frantic search was becoming more desperate, and the hope of finding a way out was slipping away with every step. By now, our panic had reached its peak. We had been wandering through the forest for hours, and the darkness was making everything worse. We felt like we were in a nightmare, with no way to escape. The oppressive silence was broken only by our labored breathing and occasional cries of frustration. Lisa, looking more scared than ever, suddenly pointed to something ahead. "Look over there. Is that a light?" We saw a faint glow through the trees. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give us a sliver of hope. We hurried towards it, pushing through the thick underbrush. As we got closer, the glow became brighter. It was coming from a small clearing with a few dimly lit lanterns hanging from the trees. We entered the clearing cautiously. In the center, there was a large stone slab with strange symbols carved into it. Around the slab were several old, broken-down chairs and tables. The lanterns cast eerie shadows, making the scene look like something out of a horror movie. "This place looks like a scene from a nightmare," Mark said, his voice trembling. "What is this?" I felt a shiver run down my spine. "I don't know, but we need to be careful." As we explored the clearing, we found a few old, dusty documents scattered on the ground. Lisa picked one up and started reading it aloud. "It says something about a ritual and protecting the area from outsiders," she said, her voice shaking. "It talks about keeping the area hidden and safe." My heart raced. "What kind of ritual?" Lisa skimmed through the document. It mentioned something about keeping people away by scaring them. And if anyone finds out too much, they have to be dealt with. The words sent a chill through me. Dealt with? What does that mean? Before Lisa could answer, we heard a noise behind us. We turned and saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was tall and thin, barely visible in the dim light. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound brave. The figure didn't move or respond. It just stood there, watching us. My fear grew as I felt an uneasy sense of being hunted. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. "Let's get out of here," Lisa whispered urgently. "We need to find a way back to the car." We turned to leave, but as we started walking, the light from the lanterns flickered and went out. The clearing was plunged into darkness, and we couldn't see anything. The shadows seemed to come alive, shifting and twisting around us. Panic set in as we stumbled through the dark. We heard whispers, faint and barely audible, but they were enough to make our skin crawl. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with a sense of dread. "Stay close," I said, trying to keep us together. "We'll find our way out." We pushed through the dark forest, but every path seemed to lead us back to the clearing. The shadows were closing in, and it felt like we were being trapped in a maze with no way out. Suddenly, the shadowy figure appeared in front of us again. It moved closer, and we could see its face more clearly now. It was a man, but his features were twisted in a way that made him look almost like a ghost. "Why are you here?" he asked in a voice that seemed to echo through the darkness. "You weren't supposed to find this place." "We're lost," I said, trying to stay calm. "We just need to leave." The man's eyes glinted in the darkness. "You're not leaving. Not until you understand the truth." He stepped closer, and we could see that he was holding a small, old book. The cover was marked with the same strange symbols we had seen earlier. He opened the book and began reading from it, his voice taking on a rhythmic, almost chant-like quality. The words he spoke were foreign and unsettling. They seemed to vibrate through the air, creating a sense of unease that grew stronger with each word. The shadows around us seemed to pulse and writhe, as if they were reacting to the man's chanting. "This place is cursed," the man said, his voice growing louder. "It's meant to keep people away and protect something that shouldn't be disturbed." I looked at Lisa and Mark, who were both visibly trembling. "We need to get out of here now," I said. "Whatever this is, we don't want any part of it." The man's chanting grew more intense, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. We tried to push past him, but it felt like we were being pulled back by an invisible force. The darkness was suffocating, and our fear was reaching its peak. In a desperate move, I grabbed the old book from the man's hands and threw it into the darkness. As soon as the book was out of sight, the chanting stopped, and the shadows seemed to retreat. The man's figure faded into the darkness, and we were left standing in an eerie silence. We didn't waste any time. We ran through the dark forest, following the faint glow of a distant light that we hoped was the way back to the highway. Our hearts pounded in our chests as we finally emerged from the trees and saw the familiar sight of the highway. We reached the car and got inside, shaking and exhausted. We didn't say much as we drove away from the rest area, but the fear was still fresh in our minds. We had uncovered the dark secret of the rest area, and the experience had left us forever changed. As we drove away, the shadows of the forest seemed to follow us, a haunting reminder of the terror we had just escaped. We vowed never to stop at a lonely rest area again, knowing now the dangers that could lie hidden in the darkness. Our nerves were frayed, and our breaths came in quick, shallow gasps. We knew we had to escape the rest area before whatever was lurking there caught up with us. The shadows seemed to stretch and writhe around us, and every rustle of leaves made us jump. "We have to find a way out," Lisa said urgently. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a note of determination. "We should try to get back to the highway," Mark suggested. "Maybe if we can get far enough away, we'll be safe." We nodded and began to move quickly through the dark forest, hoping that we were heading in the right direction. The forest seemed endless, and the darkness was so thick that we could barely see a few feet in front of us. The fear that gripped us was almost tangible. Every so often, we would hear strange sounds, soft, eerie whispers and faint rustlings, as if something was following us. We tried to ignore them, focusing instead on finding a way out. Our path was blocked by thick underbrush and tangled branches. Lisa and Mark pushed the branches aside while I hacked at them with a broken branch I had picked up. The obstacles felt like they were deliberately placed to keep us from escaping. Each step forward felt like we were being pulled back by invisible hands. "There's got to be a way through," I said, my voice strained. "We just have to keep pushing." Lisa suddenly stopped and pointed ahead. "Look! There's a path. Maybe it leads to the highway." We followed the narrow path, which seemed to be getting more overgrown and winding with every step. The path was barely wide enough for us to walk single file, and the branches seemed to reach out and grab us as we passed. The path took a sharp turn, and we found ourselves in a small clearing. In the center, there was a large, rusted gate that was partially open. Beyond it, we could see a narrow road that looked like it could lead back to the highway. "This might be our way out," Mark said, his eyes lighting up with hope. We rushed towards the gate, but as we got closer, we realized that it was covered in strange symbols, just like the ones we had seen earlier. The gate seemed to be old and rusted, and it creaked ominously as we pushed it open. "Be careful," I warned. "This place doesn't seem to want us to leave." We stepped through the gate and onto the road. The darkness of the forest seemed to close behind us, and the oppressive silence was replaced by the distant sound of traffic. We followed the road, which seemed to lead back towards the highway. As we walked, the road started to slope upward. Our exhaustion made each step feel like a battle, but we pushed on, driven by the need to escape. The sounds of the forest were now faint and distant, but the sense of dread still lingered. "We're almost there," Lisa said, trying to keep our spirits up. "We can make it." But as we continued up the road, we suddenly heard a loud, thunderous crash behind us. We turned and saw that the gate we had just passed through was now completely closed and locked. The gate seemed to be alive, with the symbols glowing faintly in the darkness. "We're trapped," Mark shouted, panic evident in his voice. "What do we do now?" I felt a wave of despair wash over me. "We have to keep going. We can't turn back." We continued to walk along the road, but the darkness seemed to grow thicker, and the road became more twisted and confusing. The traffic noises grew louder, but they seemed to come from all directions, creating an eerie disorientation. We stumbled and tripped over uneven patches in the road. The sense of urgency and fear was overwhelming. Every time we thought we were getting closer to safety, the road seemed to stretch further away. Suddenly, the road took a sharp turn, and we found ourselves back at the rest area. The familiar sights, benches, trash cans, and the dark forest, were now even more menacing. The rest area was illuminated by a sickly, yellow light that seemed to come from nowhere. "No way," I said, feeling defeated. "We're back where we started." Our hearts sank as we realized that the rest area had somehow moved us back to its center. The feeling of being trapped was more intense than ever. We tried to find another way out, but the rest area seemed to be a labyrinth, with paths leading back to where we had started. The shadows moved and shifted, making it impossible to navigate. Our desperation grew with every failed attempt. Finally, we reached the center of the rest area again, where the strange stone slab and symbols were still in place. The dark figure appeared once more, standing silently and watching us. "It's not possible," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "We can't escape." The figure didn't move or speak, but its presence seemed to mock our efforts. It felt like the rest area was a prison, with no way to escape. In our final, desperate attempt, we tried to break through the barriers around us, but it was futile. The rest area seemed to close in on us, and the darkness grew thicker. Our hope was dwindling, and we were left with the haunting realization that we might never escape this place. We were trapped in a never-ending nightmare, with no clear way out and no answers to the mystery of the rest area. The shadows enveloped us, and the sense of dread was overwhelming. Our struggle to escape had led us to the stark truth: we were prisoners in a place that defied escape. The sun was just beginning to rise as we stumbled out of the rest area, our bodies and minds exhausted from the night's ordeal. The feeling of relief was almost overwhelming, but it was mixed with a deep, gnawing fear. We had managed to escape, but we knew that something had followed us. As we drove away from the rest area, the forest gave way to open fields. The familiar sights of the highway and the morning sun provided a stark contrast to the darkness we had left behind. Yet, no matter how far we drove, the feeling of dread stayed with us. "Are we really safe now?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Mark replied. "But we need to get as far away from that place as possible." The drive was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. We passed small towns and fields, but the normalcy of the world outside felt unreal. Our minds replayed every moment of the night, every strange sound and unsettling sight. We eventually reached a small town where we decided to stop and gather our thoughts. We found a diner and sat down, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. "It felt like the rest area was alive," Lisa said quietly. "Like it was trying to keep us there." "I felt the same way," Mark agreed. Everything seemed to change around us, like the place was shifting. As we talked, we noticed that the waitress serving us seemed unusually familiar. Her smile was warm, but there was something unsettling about her eyes. She moved with an eerie calmness, as if she had seen this sort of thing before. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice gentle but hollow. "No, we're good," I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. The waitress nodded and walked away. As she left, I saw something strange. On her arm, there was a tattoo of the same symbols we had seen at the rest area. My heart raced as I realized that the symbols were part of a pattern I now recognized. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "See what?" Mark asked. "The waitress had a tattoo," I said, pointing to where the waitress had been. It had the same symbols from the rest area. Lisa and Mark exchanged worried glances. We quickly finished our meal and left the diner, the unsettling feeling growing stronger with every step. As we walked to our car, I noticed something odd in the rearview mirror. The same dark figure we had seen at the rest area seemed to be following us, just at the edge of my vision. My heart pounded, and I could barely think straight. "Do you see that?" I asked, turning to Lisa and Mark. They looked, but the figure was no longer there. It was as if it had disappeared the moment we tried to focus on it. We got into the car and drove off, but the sense of being watched never left us. The road stretched out before us, but the shadows seemed to follow us wherever we went. When we finally arrived home, the sun was high in the sky, and the nightmare of the rest area felt like a distant memory. But the feeling of unease lingered, a constant reminder of what we had been through. Later that day, as we were unpacking, I noticed something strange on the back of my phone. A photo had appeared that I didn't remember taking. It was a picture of the rest area, taken from a spot we had never been. The photo was dark and blurry, but I could make out the same symbols etched into the ground. My hands shook as I showed the photo to Lisa and Mark. They looked at it with growing horror. "Where did this come from?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, trying to stay calm. "But it means that whatever was at that rest area is still with us." The photo was a chilling reminder that our escape had not been complete. The rest area, or whatever force was behind it, had managed to reach us even after we thought we had left it behind. As night fell, the shadows in our homes seemed to stretch longer and deeper. The fear that we had tried to leave behind now settled in our lives, a constant reminder of the nightmare we had survived. The experience had changed us. We no longer felt safe in the familiar places we once took for granted. Every rustle of leaves, every dark corner seemed to hold a threat. The rest area was not just a place, it was a lingering presence, a dark secret that refused to stay buried. The final twist was clear: the rest area had not been a mere location, it was a part of something much larger, a hidden danger that followed us wherever we went. We had escaped the physical location, but the horror had found a new way to reach us. We tried to move on, but the shadows of the rest area were always with us, a haunting reminder that sometimes, the darkest places are not just locations, they are the shadows that follow us home.